You have learned how chess pieces move. Now what? Next, you need to understand how to checkmate the king. Because checkmate is literally how you win the chess game. So what exactly is the checkmate? It is a situation when you attack the opponent's king and they have absolutely no way to defend it. It cannot move on the side, there are no escape squares, no way to block it, no way to capture the piece that is checking the king, attacking the king, and no defense whatsoever. When that happens, that's a game over. Okay, now many beginners understand what checkmate is, but they do not really recognize the checkmate patterns. That's why, in my experience of having coached 200 plus individual students and probably 1,000 plus in group dynamics, I see this all the time. One player has a bunch of extra material, they get until the end, start chasing the king, they forget to check the king, and after having promoted 5 queens, whoops, suddenly it's a stalemate on the board. Stalemate is a situation when king has nowhere to go and it's also not under attack, or basically one side cannot make a move, has no moves. And the result of a stalemate is actually a draw. So you have just wasted half a point. There might be a big difference in winning the game and drawing the game. So today we are going to learn 35 essential checkmate patterns that every chess player must know and will make your life easier to checkmate an opponent's king. Okay, we are going to be using training platform aimchess.com that is part of the chess.com and have actually a few cool features, like you're able to connect your accounts chess.com and leeches, and it gives you feedback based on your games, and also you can connect it to your coach here. But the feature that we are going to be doing today is checkmate patterns. Pattern recognition is the key to success in chess. Our checkmate pattern flashcards will help you memorize these common checkmate patterns to improve your finishing skills. Let's jump right into it. We start with the Vukovic mate. So first of all, the most important thing is, as I said earlier on, checkmate is when we attack the king. So first we gotta understand how to attack the king. What are the possible checks here? Rook down to b8, rook right in front of the king, and pawn up 1 square. Right? Now if we were to go rook down, that would allow king to escape. If we were to go pawn check, that would also allow king to escape. So the safest choice usually is going right in front of your king, and the knight controls the escape squares and pawn protects the rook. So all 3 pieces there do the team job to checkmate an opponent's king. Here we have corner mate, where rook cuts the king in the corner and knight is going to deliver the checkmate. Back rank mate is probably the most common one that a lot of players forget, and they move the rook from the back rank and suddenly, whoops, king has nowhere to escape. Kill box mate is when queen has king boxed, but watch out here. If white was being slow and moved the king 1 square, then if it's black to move in this position, king has nowhere to go. So that is a stalemate. Stalemate is only half a point. So you just wasted half a point, basically. So the correct move here is rook to d8 checkmate. Next one is Reti Mate. Richard Reti was a famous chess player, one of the best in 1900s. And this is from his famous game where he sacrifices the queen. But in that game, I think he checkmated with the rook on d8 when king was on e8. In this particular game now, we're going to use the bishop. Now, again, we're looking for checks, right? How many checks do we have with this bishop? We have 1 check from f4, but that allows king to escape on b6. So we have to check from b8 so king does not escape. H-file mate is simply when pawn, king and pawn here help rook to checkmate the king from the back rank. David and Goliath. This famous story that Goliath beating David is when the usually smallest warrior beats the biggest warrior, right? In this case, pawn checkmates the king, rook cuts the king, so king cannot escape. Next one is the Arabian Mate. Arabian Mate is performed with the knight and the rook, usually either from h7 here, right in front of the king, basically. In this case, it would be from the h7 square. Morphy's Mate is when king is in the corner and rook cuts the king and uses the bishop to check and mate. Pillsbury Mate is similar, but they switch the roles here. Bishop controls the escape squares here and rook checks and mates the king. Smothered Mate is one of the coolest checkmates probably out there. This often happens when queen is sacrificed to block the king from escaping, and then knight smothers the king. Triangle Mate is when rook is a supporter of a queen and pawn blockades or other pieces blockade king from escaping, and now that would be a checkmate. Fool's Mate is the quickest possible checkmate. That is when white plays f3 first move, e5, g4, and now whoops, it's a checkmate. That's why you do not move your f pawn. Opera Mate is from the famous Paul Morphy game, Paul Morphy Opera game, which is actually a very instructive game, and I hope to analyze that on this channel sometime. Happened when white sacrificed, Morphy sacrificed the queen and bunch of material there to deliver the checkmate from the back rank. Similar is going to be Mayet's Mate, but the difference is that king's escape square is blocked with the pawns here and bishop protects the rook. Boden's Mate is performed with the bishop pair here. They together checkmate the king. Diagonal corridor mate is also similar, but now there are some more pieces and more blockading pieces involved here, namely this bishop and the pawn. The only piece that can check, well, actually rook can also check, but that would allow bishop to capture it, so we use the bishop to checkmate the king. Cozio's Mate, also called Dovetail's Mate, is when king swallows the tail. Basically, it wants to escape from the diagonal, but we check them from the very diagonal and not allowed to escape. Epaullete Mate is when king is blocked on the sides with the rooks, and queen delivers the checkmate from right in front of it. Legal's Mate, another one of the coolest checkmates probably, and the oldest ones, when white sacrifices the queen, and if black is being hasty and does not think, why would they do that? Why would they sacrifice the queen? Because now bishop check to f7, and surprisingly enough, king gets mated in the center of the board. Damiano's Mate is when queen is protected with the pawn, and this pawn also blocks the king from escaping, and rook blocks the king from escaping to f8. So now queen to h7 is going to be a checkmate. Corridor Mate is when king is corridored, basically cannot escape one file or the other, and then queen delivers the vertical checkmate. Scholar's Mate is one of the most common ways to lose games probably, and this is when white immediately goes for the checkmate in 4 moves and black disregards white's threat and allows here queen f7 checkmate. Greco's Mate is with the bishop and the rook. Now this rook can check the king 2 ways, f8 or h1. If we go f8, then king is going to escape to h7. So we have to go to h1 here. Blindswine Mate is with 2 rooks when king has no escape squares and both rooks are checking the king. Anastasia's Mate, also a very common checkmate pattern. Knight controls the king's escape squares here, and then rook is going to checkmate. Now Lolli's Mate is when pawn protects the queen and queen delivers the checkmate right in front of the king. Now, this a lot of times in the books you will see inevitable mate also, because even if it was black to move, black king would not be able to go anywhere. Maybe h8, but that's still a checkmate from g7. Okay. Suffocation mate is when bishop and knight here establish the coordination. Bishop controls the king's escape squares and the knight delivers the checkmate. Swallowtail mate, also Gueridon mate, apparently is when king again is gonna swallow the tail now, wants to escape back, but these pawns are blocking the escape squares, and the only square it can go to is g7 right now, and these two f6 and h6, but if queen goes in front of it, there will be no escape. Max Lange Mate is performed with bishop and the queen. I believe this rook is extra here, but I guess the reason why it is there, so the bishop g6 is not a checkmate. Okay, because otherwise it would be a checkmate. So right now, since the rook is standing there, the correct mate would be queen to g6. Next one is the Lawnmower mate. Lawnmower is probably the most common one you want to use when you are playing online. Okay, you place your rooks in the corners here, and if you have to chase the king, you're gonna chase it like that. Okay, some also call it a ladder mate. Ladder mate is probably more common with queen and rook, but it also can be done with two rooks. Okay, one rook is used to keep king cut on the back rank, and another rook is going to deliver the checkmate. Hook mate is when pawn protects the knight and knight is going to protect the rook to deliver the checkmate from the h file. Balestra mate is with queen and the bishop, when queen controls all the escape squares except the light diagonal here, and that's what the bishop is going to be used for. Anderssen mate, I think this actually repeated, didn't it? This was also called the h file mate, right? King and pawn protect the rook to deliver the checkmate. And next is going to be Blackburn's mate. Blackburn's mate is probably one of the trickiest ones, because there's got to be three pieces involved in this checkmate. Knight controls all the squares. This bishop controls dark squares. Knight controls f7 and h7 square. And now where does white check from? Is it going to be c4? Well, that's also a good option, but allows black to block it with the rook, so it's not an immediate checkmate. So another check that would be immediate checkmate is bishop to h7. Here's the two bonus checkmates. When I was editing this video, I realized I need to talk to you about these two mates that gonna come in very handy for you, because it's gonna happen a lot that you end up with an extra material. Maybe you are low on time. If you like to play faster time control games, you start chasing the king, and the easiest way here would be put the queens on the files next to each other, and then you just roll the ladder all the way to the last file here, a file. Okay, that is a ladder checkmate. This can happen with queen and rook, or better with two queens. Another useful checkmate that you absolutely need to know is how to win with a queen versus a king when you promote at the end of the game. One important rule to remember is you want to corner the king. You cannot checkmate the king in the center of the board, so you are going to try take this in the this king in the corner. Then easy way to force the king in the corner here is put the queen on the knight position away from the king. That way you are limiting the king to only few squares. Like in this situation, king already went into the center, and we are now going to cut the king so it doesn't cross the b file. Then we bring our king close by, and when kings are staring at each other, queen is gonna go in front of them, and that is going to be a checkmate. All right, that's about it. Now you know 35 essential checkmate patterns. So when you do puzzles next time, don't just click next, click next, click next. All right, try to slow down and recognize the pattern. What was the name of this pattern? Now, you do not have to memorize all of them, but you do want to understand some of them, how it works. Okay, maybe you don't remember the exact name of the pattern, but oh, I remember this. I learned this in checkmate patterns. This is how it is performed. All right, I hope this helps, and I'll see you in the next video.